agency.podcast. We're pretty excited to have a return guest, Rick Wallach, who was talking to us during the pandemic about cooking and various other topics.
Oh.
And second, he
Yeah, I
is,
made falafel from scratch today. So
oh, wow, very good.
yeah.
I just want to say quickly, this is going to be a gushing love story. I'm I owe Rick so much. He's an unrequested mentor to me. I've known him online at least 25 years. He has pushed me to read different books, new books, pushed me to write better, think better, and he's really one of the all-American spirits, the this romantic notion of what Americana is, the good part of it. He really
And listen to
embodies
more
that.
and listen to more cowboy junkies.
That's right. Oh, yes. And we also have Special Agent Sarah here. And Sarah, I've got to tell you that Rick has been writing the definitive Cowboy Junkies book.
Really
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah. So Sarah,
I just
glad to have you here.
very
How's
good
the,
to be here again.
how's the weather in the northern Canada?
It's almost spring,
Good.
which is super strange. We
And,
normally have blizzards this time of year, but
and
it's
how goes
happening.
the war? How goes the war?
Uh, the trade war or
Yes, the
just
trade
life in
war. The
general?
trade war.
It's so far so good.
All right.
Canada's holding strong. We're resisting. We're not
Okay.
caving into Trump.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of the trade war, Rick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to a much better war and a much better discussion. Rick, you've sent me notes and your proceedings of a fabulous new book, In Search of Godzilla. And I'm telling you, there's parts of it where I even cry because of your passion for reptiles and nature and life. You have brought Godzilla into my heart. I'd like to know, how did this all start?
How did the book start? Uh,
Or
how do
your
I
love
put
of
this?
Godzilla. Or your love of Godzilla.
Well, my love of Godzilla started in 1956. In early July of 1956 at the Strand Theater in Far Rockaway, New York.
Hmm.
My father took me to see the American version of the original Godzilla, which is the one where they spliced Raymond Burr in as an American reporter covering the Godzilla story and, to provide a white identity figure
Mm,
in a Japanese film that was, it was imported at a time when Pearl Harbor was still a thing.
yeah.
It was still a big
Yeah.
issue. Uh, and I mean, I loved it.
Yeah.
I, I was totally captivated by it.
Yeah.
Uh, but, but really, as I said in the introduction to the book, I started on that path to Godzilla 2 years earlier when I was 4 years old, and my father took me to the American Museum of Natural History in New York,
Yes.
and I met my first dinosaurs and my first Komodo dragons, I might
Yes.
add. So by the time I got to Godzilla, my whole room was plastered with posters of dinosaurs
Oh.
and James Knight painting
Hmm.
reproductions and things like that. And Godzilla was just kind of he consummated my childhood love of dinosaurs, the way Thomas Mann consummated German romanticism. It was, I mean, that's a stretch, but
I
I'll,
like
I'll
it.
go with it. Yeah. Uh, and then, of course, I made him take me back to see it again multiple times.
Yeah.
And then, pardon me, it ran on a, a TV show in New York called $1 Million Movie.
Mm.
And there was a 7 o'clock show and 11 o'clock show. And at that age, I had a fight to watch the 11 o'clock show. But if they went out for the evening,
Oh yeah.
I did. And then it was 4 times on Saturday and 4 times on Sunday.
That's incredible.
So I don't know how many times that is in a week,
Yeah.
but I watched it every single time.
That's
And
cool.
then You know, he was always there. Godzilla was always there. He haunted my dreams.
Yeah.
I kept having nightmares where I was running down the street and he was right behind me,
Mm.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they were fruitful dreams. I mean, I, it wasn't anything. I didn't want it to stop really.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, let's fast forward to June of 2022. I woke up in the hospital after my heart attack,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just lying there, not much to do in a hospital on a respirator.
Yes.
So I asked Rowena to bring me my laptop. Went on Amazon Prime,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, what am I going to watch tonight? And I watched Godzilla, right? Yeah, Amazon at this point was running the original Godzilla
Uh,
before Raymond Burr
mm.
got got spliced in. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, you know what? I've got 70 years, almost 70 years worth of being fascinated with this film. I got to write something. And when I sit down to when I decided to start writing on that laptop in the hospital, uh, I had an article about 4 or 5 years old that had been in Culture and Technology Review
Mm.
about radiophobia in Japan,
Mm.
in the decade after World War II. And so I took that out, and that became the little uh, nugget that I started building around. I didn't expect to write a book,
Mm.
you know, but the book happened. uh,
Yeah.
I started doing research. I kept finding great stuff to work into the essay.
Mm-hmm.
The essay expanded, became unwieldy as a single essay. I started breaking it down into chapters.
Yeah.
All right. And then, of course, uh, just before I got sick, there had been a Toho film called Shin Godzilla,
Mm.
Return of Godzilla or Godzilla Resurgence, which was almost like a parody, a comedy on the original Godzilla in parody form. And it it revolved around the Fukushima, the Great East Japan quake and the Fukushima disaster, the way the original Godzilla revolved around Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the hydrogen bomb tests
Mm.
at Bikini. So, and the parallels were very deliberate
Mm.
and very funny too, I might add.
Mm.
But
Mm.
you had to be a serious Japanophile
Yeah.
to catch 80% of the comedy, which had to do with Japanese bureaucratic bungling.
Mm-hmm.
How do a bunch of stupid bureaucrats deal with a monster, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, 2 years ago, there was Godzilla Minus One,
Mm-hmm.
which also was a commentary on the original Godzilla, but it was much more than that, of course.
Yeah.
Takeshi Yamazaki, the director, is, I think, the natural heir to Akira Kurosawa as a maker of classical Japanese films. And a couple of his films, uh, The Great War of Archimedes, which is about the corruption that attended the building of the battleship Yamato, when in an age of aviation, it didn't have a prayer of long-term survival, no
Mm.
matter how big it was.
Mm.
And then there was a film called The Eternal Zero,
Mm.
which is also called The Fighter Pilot. The Eternal Zero in its American release,
Well,
which was about a kamikaze pilot who chickens out,
yeah.
uh, and the and then it finds his nerve and gets back in another plane
Yeah. I want to get to
fulfills
some
his
I want to
mission
get to some of these
months later.
yeah, I want to get to some of these contemporary responses to Godzilla and the history of Godzilla. But I think we still have some questions. We'll get to that towards, in further along in the interview. I definitely still want to hear a bit more, and I know that Sarah must have some questions or ideas. Um, a bit more about how you've approached this. You have a delightful way of reading. I always forget what a good writer you are. You encapsulated me. Sarah, what are some of your first responses? You have a friend that's into Godzilla.
I do. My friend Mark, who may be listening, he and his girlfriend Pam have watched every iteration of Godzilla that I know of. It's kind of a hobby of theirs. And I asked him if he had any questions, and his question was basically my question. And it's about the nature of using film to resolve trauma or to reckon with trauma. Do you feel that the original Godzilla movie was sort of a way of healing for the Japanese, and it sort of brought in a way to reckon with something that was just couldn't be
No,
comprehended?
I think healing was an element of it, but it's much too simple an explanation. Um, Godzilla was a way of dealing with something, namely nuclear war, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. And then just about the time that Godzilla was being made, the Japanese started to become acutely aware of the deformative power of radiation, as the Hibakusha, the survivors of the two bombed cities, started having deformed children, and then their children, even if not deformed, were developing a lot of the same types of cancers. Uh, the horror, this invisible thing, that was affecting us, that had to be dealt with. Uh, just before Godzilla was made, was the Castle Bravo test, the hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll, that irradiated a Japanese tuna boat uh, called the Lucky Dragon 5, the Daigo Fukuoka Moru.
Mm.
Uh, and they didn't know, they were well outside the area that U.S. Uh, uh, forces had said stay this far back. They were well
Mhm.
beyond that. They still got showered with fallout.
Mhm.
So
They didn't.
they were given the impression that it was safe, were they not?
Yeah, they brought their fish back to market. It was all sold, and then someone decided to take a Geiger. They started getting sick, and someone said, some doctor said, "This is radiation sickness." And they examined the boat, and it was just jumping off the dial. And yet all this radioactive fish had been sold and consumed, or was about to be sold and consumed. And for months after that, no tuna could be brought into port and sold in Japan. It all had to be dumped into pits and buried.
Mm.
And if you know Japanese, eating habits, that's earth shaking, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
So there was that to deal with. Then there was something else that happened just before a year or two before the film was made. Uh, there's a chain of islands that stretches uh, in a kind of a crescent toward the southwest from Tokyo Bay, called the Izu Archipelago. And at the south end of that, there was a volcano called Myojin Sho, and a Japanese research vessel with 30 with a crew of 32, including the researchers, went out to study this rumbling volcano, and they parked themselves right over it, and the volcano exploded like Krakatoa underneath them, blew the boat to smithereens, killed everybody on the boat, And the the volcano then rose out of the water. These frags of lava rose out of the water, belching lava, and then sank again and left just the tips of the caldera above water. And those are now known as the Bayanese rocks,
Hmm.
the very southern end of the Izu archipelago. Now, if you look at films of that, there is something remarkably like Godzilla with that castellated
The
back
spike, yeah, yeah.
rising out of the water, you know, and then sinking back again. Okay. So I mention this because at the beginning of the film, when the first boat gets sunk and they don't know what's happening, the Japanese Coast Guard officer says, well, maybe it's something like what happened with Myojin Show, where we were in communication with the research boat and then suddenly it disappeared. Uh, and the thing that Americans really would have to stretch to appreciate is that for weeks and weeks, that was the big newspaper story in Japan. That was the image that was in everybody's face. This and the boat, the I've seen pictures of the research vessel, is exactly the same kind of ship that you see carrying Dr. Yamane and his research party to Odo Island and then carrying Okada and Serizawa and the oxygen destroyer, out to kill Godzilla. Same boat.
Wow, that's
Okay.
pretty cool.
So this thing stayed, in the background of the Japanese consciousness. So everyone's talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So much more is going on. So much more is being referenced.
Well,
And
that's
I'll
what.
tell you one other great story, and this applies directly to Godzilla minus one as well. In June of 1947, a bunch of guys from Los Angeles who were staffing the armed forces radio station
Mm.
broadcasting out of Tokyo. One of these guys said, "Hey, let's run a gag like the Orson Welles War of the Worlds,
Mm.
radio broadcast that, panicked the whole country." And they ran a gag where a sea monster emerged from Tokyo Harbor,
Oh,
and they had tapes of cannons firing, machine guns firing, people screaming, sounds of buildings collapsing, and they freaked out Tokyo. Okay, so
wow.
this is June 1947.
Mm.
Douglas MacArthur was not amused. Okay,
Well, Rick, that
he
brings up.
busted up. He took these guys
Yeah.
and he broke them up. He sent them to Alaska. He sent them to Korea. You
Yeah.
know, he's it was. I mean, he's dealing with trying to get a new constitution written.
There, I'm glad you mentioned this, Rick, because let's kind of do a little bit of talking here because part of what you're saying is
Let me
there's.
just let me just
Oh
let me
yeah,
wrap that
please.
in answer to your question. Uh, Godzilla was a way of dealing
Mm.
symbolically with a complex of tragedies and disasters that were too big and too horrifying and too ugly to want to confront literally. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There were a series of films, which I mentioned in the book, about Hiroshima that came out right after the occupation ended and film censorship in Japan ended. Okay. Nobody wanted to go see them. They
Oh,
flopped
wow.
completely. Okay. Akira Kurosawa's uh, uh, only film of the period to deal directly with nuclear warfare, which was called I Live in Fear,
Hmm.
and featured a 30-year-old Toshiro Mifune in an absolutely mind-blowing performance as a 70-year-old industrialist who's paranoid about the bomb.
Mm.
Okay. And was his only film not to make money and to fill at the box office. Godzilla was a runaway hit.
Hmm.
So it was as if to say, yeah, we can deal symbolically with this,
Hmm.
but we can't deal directly with it. And
It's
Godzilla fulfilled that need.
That's right. Well, what strikes me most in, especially in the first film, is just the sheer rage of this monster that rises out of the ocean and is just incoherently furious. And I'm just wondering if seeing
Oh,
that
wouldn't you? Wouldn't you
kind of
be?
exactly, exactly.
One of the great things about Godzilla minus one is that when you first see Godzilla, he's small. He's a T-Rex sized thing that plagues Odo Island, right? Then you see the test of not of the hydrogen bomb. It's too early, right? It's 1946. It's the test of the Crossroads atomic bomb, and you see this smaller Godzilla underwater being irradiated and not liking it at all, you know.
Hmm.
And when you next see him, he's 10 times the size, you know. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, you see how these films play in. Yamazaki's a genius. I mean, I love him. The Eternal Zero is a masterpiece.
Hmm.
It's now considered the greatest war film, ever produced by Japanese
Wow.
filmmakers.
Yeah.
Uh, and then they get him, who's made a film about a cowardly kamikaze pilot
Yeah.
to make a Godzilla movie. And how does it open? It opens with a cowardly kamikaze pilot, you know, uh, landing on Odo Island and claiming that his engine is malfunctioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean,
amazing.
yeah,
It's all connected. Yes. It's so
all
amazing.
all connected. Yeah,
Yes. Well, I want to just kind of bring us to a little part of what you're saying, Rick and Sarah, regarding trauma and regarding the art form of Godzilla. Is that, Rick, I think for younger listeners, that, I don't know if this podcast has any young listeners, but let's pretend they do. They may not realize the kind of censorship that Japan was under in 1945, that America stepped in and broke apart their culture, just like they did with First Nations and Indigenous people in America. You said that they made women have equal rights. Now, and I'm
yeah,
like blown away. I don't even know if American women had equal rights in 1945, but they forced it to break up the clans in Japan, correct?
yes, correct.
Yeah, I found
Uh,
that
and
fascinating.
they also required women to have educations,
Okay, yes, and they
basic
made
educations.
right, which extended children's relief from their parents running their lives. Children became more free to think, I think I understood you say.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Uh, and Kurosawa's failure, quote unquote, box office failure,
yeah,
although it's an artistic masterpiece.
yeah,
I Live in Fear.
yeah.
You have an extended family that's been impacted by this, and they're warped.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, they have this paterfamilias who's like 75 years old, and they treat him like shit.
Mm-hmm.
And audiences, whoever did go see this film, was probably totally horrified
Mm-hmm.
by the way these well, they're grown, they're young adults
Hi.
are treating this
Yeah,
old man,
yeah.
you know, and yeah, the occupation was uh, very oppressive. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was liberating in the sense that yes, it broke up the clans, it repressed the Bushido, worship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was really MacArthur versus Mishima.
Yes.
Mishima was the only one who was still extolling
Yes.
the Bushido spirit, and MacArthur determined to destroy it. Um, it's a peculiar thing. All of that is in Godzilla. In fact,
Mm.
Mishima, of all of the newspaper critics, who reviewed the original Godzilla when it opened in Nagoya in 1950 and 1954. Uh, Mishima was the only critic to
Mm,
write a favorable review of Godzilla.
mhm.
He
Wow.
said the article was called Godzilla's Egg, and it said basically, and I mean, Mishima put his right-wing fanaticism behind it, as he always did. But he basically said Godzilla is Japan.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
Godzilla
that's
is
amazing.
Japan. He's the Japan we ought to be, taking revenge on the Japan we become.
Right.
You know,
Interesting. Well, and that
yeah,
Yeah.
again answers to trauma and censorship because I don't know, you're probably aware in anime, they weren't allowed to do pornography, so they created octopus as a sexual motif, right?
yeah,
And in your
yeah,
book,
and
you
and
say that,
you know that the original Godzilla
yes.
was supposed to be a giant octopus.
Oh, really? That's
Oh yeah,
funny.
and
Funny.
isn't that hilarious?
Yes.
The original title of Godzilla was the horrible monster from 2 million miles beneath the
Yeah.
sea.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
I
2 million miles
Bit
beneath the
wordy.
sea brings you out in in Argentina somewhere. So uh, but and again, a giant octopus. But Honda said no.
okay.
I
Yeah.
want a dinosaur.
Yeah. Well,
And so did Aji Tsuburaya, who was the special effects master who created the pseudomation technique.
hmm
You know,
Um,
uh, and of course there was an American science fiction movie called "It Came from Beneath the Sea," which featured a giant octopus climbing up the not the Oakland Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge
oh yeah.
in San Francisco. So the octopus got his due,
Yes.
but where did that cephalopod come from?
I
Well,
don't know.
it came from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Beneath the
Mm,
Sea,
hmm
the giant squid who attacks the Nautilus.
Right. Right.
And what was the Nautilus? The Nautilus was a sea monster that wrecked boats,
Yes.
right? And where did the Nautilus wreck Professor Aronnax's boat? Off Japan.
So you're saying this is a metaverse?
Absolutely a
Yeah.
metaverse.
Well, the censorship part, two things. One is that no one wants to lose face. No one wants to be ashamed. And most people want to hide their emotions, especially if they feel weak. If they cry, they always, I'm sorry, I'm crying. So, in a way, the censorship answers Sarah's question about trauma is that they could have these huge emotional portrayals reacting to Godzilla, fear of losing their life, fear of losing their loved ones, having
Oh,
engagements break up.
but people cried
Yes,
in at the showings of
yes,
Godzilla in Japan.
yes, yes.
There's a
Well,
scene
they
in Godzilla, and I'm sure you'll remember it too, Sarah, where it's after Godzilla has destroyed Tokyo, returned to the sea, and these scenes of the devastation and these crippled and burned people in the hospital.
hmm
Okay. And there's Professor Tanabe, the physicist, and he's got a little child there, and he's examining the child with a Geiger counter, and he turns to Emiko and just very, very slightly, with a grim look on his face, shakes his head like this kid's this kid's, you know,
It's too far. It's
he's
too
he's,
much.
he's gone. He's
Yeah,
gone. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And people broke down. I mean, there were other scenes that people freaked out about, but people broke down at that scene and
Mhm.
had to go out of leave the theater.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems to
So,
me that Godzilla was able to fulfill so many emotional and social functions at that time.
mhm.
They got to express the rage that they probably felt that was kind of suppressed in Japanese culture, I would imagine, just the fury at
Oh
how they've
yeah,
been treated during the
and
war.
look, the backstory, the backstory that carries so much of the narrative below the surface is the affair between Emiko and Ogata,
Yes.
the marine naval officer,
Hmm.
when she has been engaged since childhood to Dr. Serizawa, which is the classic Japanese way to do it. Now, you know, now she's been educated and she's saying gently, fuck that. This is the guy I want, you know, to an older Japanese member of a movie audience. It's like what she's doing is scandalous.
Yeah.
You know, she's dumping her, her arranged marriage to run off with this sailor. You know, and that too, the Yamane family, old Professor Yamane, his daughter, and you're saying to yourself, what does he think of this? He and Serizawa's parents arranged this marriage, but it's never resolved.
Hmm. Well,
You
it's
know,
an upheaval of its own. If Godzilla is an upheaval and a bomb is an upheaval, ending a relationship in social structures is an upheaval. So
yeah,
you're right, there's so
it
many
is.
layers
It,
going
it,
on.
it many, many layers of upheaval. And, it's Godzilla. I'll tell you another great story. Um,
I
Trying
can't.
to remember the name of the bridge. The Shigabashura Bridge in Tokyo was the site of a very, very popular Japanese radio soap opera called What Is Your Name? And it's about two people who are both married to other people who meet in a bomb shelter during the Operation Meeting House fire bombings in Tokyo,
Mm.
and then meet irregularly uh, on this bridge to talk about their lives and also talk about shaking off, but this new Japan. It was so popular that work stopped, you know, in Tokyo so that people could listen to it.
Wow.
And right. And Godzilla walks right across that very bridge, and wrecks it.
Hmm.
Okay.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, Honda, Honda just reached out, gathered all this stuff in,
Yeah.
and made this movie.
Yeah.
One other thing that I think is very important to understanding why Godzilla towers, why the original Godzilla towers over all the other films in the
Yeah.
sequence,
Yeah.
is that at the time that Godzilla was being made, right across the hall, so to speak, Akira Kurosawa was making Seven Samurai.
Mm.
Okay. And Kurosawa was Honda's best friend. They've been best friends since college.
Hmm.
Honda was set director on most of Kurosawa's early masterpieces. Okay.
Amazing.
In fact, um, when he made Throne of Blood, which was his version of Macbeth, uh, Honda uh, said, "No, no, no, you got the wood. The wood is angled wrong. The grain runs like this." And Honda would then took over and did the shellacking and varnishing of the ancient castle,
Mm.
so that Kurosawa named him. His nickname for him was the Keeper of the Grain. That was
Interesting.
Honda. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw an interview with one of the actors from Seven Samurai saying that there was some buzz about Godzilla on the set of
Mm.
Yeah.
Seven Samurai. They didn't
Well,
know
you couldn't
anything
help
about
it.
the film, but they were
I mean, they were
excited.
literally right across the hall.
Hmm.
And then Kurosawa and Honda are having lunch in the company in a Toho cafeteria every day.
Yeah.
They're making their respective films. Okay. The depth and resonance and layers of Godzilla, hell me, that he's talking it all over with Kurosawa,
Mm.
you know, and that the uncredited assistant director of Godzilla is Akira Kurosawa.
Interesting. But
You know,
people were very excited. It seemed like they were really anticipating it. They didn't know precisely what it was going to be, but they could sense it was going to be something big, and we're looking
Yeah,
forward to it.
yeah. Well, Kurosawa was coming back after talking it over with his best buddy and shaking his head like, I can't believe what he's doing, and it's very hard to hide that. Okay. Toho did not release the name of the movie until the movie came out. They called it the G Project,
The G project.
the G
Oh,
Project.
oh,
And
top
yeah,
secret.
uh, so it just,
Well, I'm kind of going to jump in again. Sorry. There's so many things I want to ask you, and I'm sure Sarah too, but I noticed
I'm
you
not
said
going anywhere.
I know we're not in a hurry. None of us. We have time. You said two things that stood out to me out of many. Radiation cinematic ability. That it's a great topic for storytelling and effects. It's a cinematic topic. Can you elaborate that for us?
Oh yeah, uh, if you watch Godzilla walking, moving,
Yeah.
that kind of jerky,
Yeah.
fumbling it, that's 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 straight kabuki.
Kabuki, yes. And also, what about you? You were saying a giant bug.
And then holding his,
Three eyes. Oh,
huh?
you were saying about
Holding his hands up.
mutations that happen because of radioactive cinematic ability. You can have giant animals. You could have a giant bug.
Yeah.
Yeah, with radiation, you can go anywhere in storytelling.
Well, yeah. The radiation in American science fiction movie was a gimmick.
Yeah,
It was a plug-in.
yeah,
Let's have a giant ant.
yeah,
Let's have giant, let's have giant grasshoppers.
yeah.
Right? Let's have giant whatever.
Mm,
Uh in Godzilla, radiation is a moral force. And
mm,
it's a negative moral force. Okay. But the ethical dimension of it is never lost.
mm.
In American science fiction, oops, we we blew it. We made this giant bug. Sorry about that.
Beautiful.
But
Thank you.
yeah, Honda said to his crew as they began shooting, I want to make radiation visible.
Mm, mm,
Okay. Radiation, we can't eat the fish. The, the kids are getting cancer. It was everywhere. Okay. It was very much the way it was after Fukushima.
mm.
And we can get to that a little later because
Yeah,
that's critical.
yeah.
Uh, there is no way, unless you go to Japan and you go to the bomb museums in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where they have these dioramas and murals of people with their skin peeled off, wandering blindly,
Mm,
through the ruins,
mm.
holding their hands like this, which is exactly the way Godzilla holds his.
Wow.
Okay. Uh, and in the book, I said like they resemble ambulatory cinders.
Yeah.
It's that unless you go to Auschwitz, you know, you can't find a comparable testament
Mhm.
to man's bottomless inhumanity. And this was so present in the consciousness. The Japanese wanted to forget it. They wanted to move beyond it. They wanted to get beyond, forget it, get out. And every time you wake up and pick up a newspaper, something else has happened to bring it back. If it wasn't the kids getting sick, if it wasn't the deformed children, if it wasn't the radioactive tuna being banned and buried, every time you tried not to see it, something brought it back.
Mm.
And Godzilla is very much, the original Godzilla is very much in that spirit. You know, Tokyo had been not totally rebuilt, but it was on its way to being rebuilt. Markers of loss were disappearing
Oh,
from the Japanese landscape.
oh,
Okay.
no.
And as one critic put it, Godzilla returns to reinscribe loss,
Mm.
you know,
Mhm.
on the Japanese landscape. So,
Wow.
pretty fun.
You know, sorry. Can you also, I've written down something else. I'm going to paraphrase you here. If you can elaborate. Gojira, with echoes of Buddhist and Shinto lore, plumbed the deeper significance by placing radiophobia at the service of a creating myth.
Yeah.
How how so?
Well, uh, first of all, Gojira is most immediately based on a Japanese sea dragon named, oh God, I'm going to forget this, right?
Right.
Uh, on a Japanese, Ryojin,
Mm,
Ryojin. Uh, and to give you an idea of how seriously Honda took that myth,
yeah.
uh, he and his wife Kimi, their little boy, they named Ryuji.
Oh, wow.
So, right. So Ryujin is the great grandfather of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. And Amaterasu is the great, 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 great grandmother of the emperor, right? So, in a way, that implicates Godzilla in the family lineage of, the royal family of Japan. It's another aspect of it that's I find absolutely wonderful.
Mm,
Um, and there are scenes in Godzilla. Ukiyo-e was a tradition of Japanese woodblock painting,
mm,
okay, featured mythological characters. And there's a very famous one of Ryujin looking, curling around and looking down at a princess, right,
mm,
threatening this princess. And Honda recreated that the 300-year-old painting. In the scene where Godzilla comes up over the mountain on Odo Island and Emiko falls, and Godzilla is right above her looking down and roaring at her, right?
mhm,
And Okada runs over, grabs her, and pulls her out of the way. I'm telling you, that is a virtual recreation
mhm.
of this very famous Japanese woodblock painting. When you say
That's
this guy knew what
fascinating.
he
That
was
that
doing,
takes
he really knew it. But that Joseph Campbell described myths as energy releasing and directing signs. Okay. And
Mhm.
in that sense, I mean, that's exactly what Godzilla has come to be. Okay. He's he's right out of the Nihon Shoki, which is the great ancient Japanese compendium of creation myths and founding of Japan myths.
Mhm.
Um, Japanese dragons were not fire breathers. They breathed or they exhaled a corrosive aerosol. And if you look at the original Godzilla movie, that's what he's doing.
Mhm.
It's not fire, it's not a laser beam, it's an aerosol that ignites everything it touches.
Mhm.
It's radioactive,
Mhm.
but it is Japanese dragon breath.
Mhm.
Okay. So all of this
Right.
ancient mythographic uh, narrative is coming back to life in him.
And I think you
That's
said,
wonderful. I was curious about that as well, about what ties there could be to folklore because of the dragons and other mo huge beasts. I was very curious about that. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
that's another reason Honda wanted to go with the dinosaur. He said, "Hey, you know, uh, every third myth we have in the Nihon Shoki or in the Kojiki, any of these ancient Japanese texts are full of dragons. So don't give me an octopus. What is he going to do? Squirt radioactive ink over everything? No,
well, it is interesting because again, that is resisting the kind of censorship to be a secular, modern, capitalist, monetized society to have this monster come back from the past.
absolutely. Oh, and really from the past.
Really.
It's
And
unfortunate that paleontology, uh, Shigeru Kayama and Takeo Murata, who wrote the story and the screenplay for Godzilla with Honda, looking over them, uh, have Professor Yamane saying that Gojira is 2 million years old.
Hmm.
Well, that doesn't even scratch the ice age, you know. Uh, I'm gonna might as well have had him be a giant hairy elephant. But
but
um, but
I
but
think
it
his
caught up very quickly. Uh, there was a Japanese paleontologist whose name is it's in the book. It slips my mind. That Shigeru Kayama studied under at Tokyo University. Was wrote the compendium of prehistoric life
Hmm.
in Japan. So he's studying under this guy. Yeah, of course he's going to write. You know, uh, uh, too bad he got the paleontology wrong. I'm sure the guy died in 1942. This professor,
Yeah.
but he's clearly the model for Professor Yamane.
Yeah.
Okay, and probably lucky he died in 1942 because if he watched the movie and heard 2 million years, you know, he would have cringed in his seat.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that in no drama, no drama, NOH, uh, on the stage there is always a world axial pine tree
Oh, yeah.
placed on the stage.
Yep.
Okay, in Gojira, metaphorically speaking, that axial pine has been replaced by the mushroom cloud.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
so you never see the mushroom cloud,
Right.
and if you go to a no play, you almost don't even notice this pine tree, but it must be there.
Hmm.
Okay, I mean I went to a lot of no drama when I was in Japan.
Yeah.
Um, I was there 3 times, maybe for a total of like 8 weeks.
That's incredible.
I went to a lot of the dramas. I went to Kabuki.
Hmm.
I listened to a lot of music
Hmm.
and ritual music. Um, so, the scene where they performed that ritual expiation
Hmm.
on Odo Island to chase Godzilla away, and that old man, whose name is Izuma, by the way, people were worrying, where is Odo Island? We're going to, you know, they had it located in Polynesia. They had it located down in the Bonin Islands, somewhere south of Okinawa. You know, the guy's name is Izuma. Where do you think that island is?
Yeah.
He is, he's the shamanic spirit. He's the keeper of the legends.
Yeah.
Um, he got that great face.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
was a Japanese actor, Kakuten Kodo. He was also in Seven Samurai, which I find hilarious. It's the way Toho worked. They'd squeeze every ounce of time out of you.
Mhm.
So he's playing Izuma on Odo Island and runs across the hall, play one of the bandits in Seven Samurai. You know, it's like uh, great stuff, really. That face. There are two actors in Godzilla
Hmm.
that have woodblock painting samurai faces. One is Izuma, and the other, of course, is the great Takashi Shimura,
Hmm.
Dr. Yamane,
Dr. Yuan, yeah.
who also was running back and forth between Godzilla and Seven. He's
Wow.
he's he's Shimada in Seven Samurai. He's the
Wow.
leader, and
Crazy.
he's Yamane, and
You're right. It's so efficient. It's so efficient. Um,
well, I mean, if the people on the set at Seven Samurai knew something was going on, you got two guys
Yeah.
who were in both movies. Yeah, of course they knew something was going on, and I bet you they knew more
yeah.
than they were saying. But they also know the studio had sworn everyone to secrecy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Sarah, you wanted to ask something or say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the form of Godzilla because it is interesting that they wanted something prehistoric and reptilian because there's nothing remotely human about that. We can't relate to it like we can a primate like King Kong or um, it's just so removed from us. We wouldn't understand its thinking, its actions. It's but at the same time, there are those mythical connections to humanity that would have
yeah,
resonated somewhat with the Japanese, I think.
absolutely. Well, I mean, the Japanese society, even now, despite MacArthur, despite everything that the um, uh, that the occupation tried to accomplish, that spirit of Japan, that Yamato Daishi, Daishi, that saturating spirit of Japan, a 2,000-year-old sensibility.
Mm.
It's still there, but it's taken some very unusual forms. You know, it, I mean, you certainly see it in the anime.
Mm.
You and of course in Godzilla, and the entire string of 30 Godzilla films that Tokyo cranked out. I'm not even counting these god awful MonsterVerse films, and it certainly isn't counting that atrocity, that 1998 atrocity by Roland Emmerich. I mean, which featured
Oh,
possibly the worst performance by an actress in a movie in all of American cinema. I'm not saying a lot. Um,
tell
you
us how you really
disenfranchise,
feel.
yeah, you disenfranchise
Yeah.
Godzilla
Yeah.
from his Japanese roots,
Okay.
and he deflates like a balloon. I think,
That's what I was
Um,
wondering too, is there anything in the American films other than the first Americanized version of the original that would even have anything to say, really?
no,
Yeah, I didn't think so.
no, it's the same old shit. Radiation is bad.
Mhm.
You know, I, there's nothing about American culture, society. There's nothing.
Mhm.
You know, um, and I think to compensate for the vacuum of meaning and resonance, they make the MonsterVerse Godzilla three times the size of the original.
Mm.
Which is like, you know, uh, he looks like he kind of looks like a Saurian Luca Brasi, uh, in the American version. I'll tell you a great story about Luca
Fishes.
Brasi too.
Yes.
Luca Brasi was in fact a Colombo family hitman.
Yeah.
Okay, and Francis Ford Coppola had made a deal with the five families that words like that mafia would never be used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the film, and they sent the guy who played Luca Brasi, his name slips my mind at the moment.
Okay, we'll find it.
They, huh?
We'll find it.
Yeah, they sent him to sit in on the set and make sure that nothing, you know, that the
Didn't get
agreement was not.
said. Yeah.
So Coppola took one look at him and said, "I want you to play Luca Brasi. You're my Luca Brasi. You want to be in a movie? What is this guy going to say? You know,
Yeah.
he's probably got the IQ of a 9-year-old." And so he says,
Poor
"Wow,
Lenny Montana.
Yeah." He says, "Yeah, I'd love to do it." Right. So he's on the set, and the prop manager, this woman, comes up to him with a fake gun, right, a prop gun, and she hands it to him and says, "Now you do know how to handle one of these, right?" And Lenny Montana looks down at her and says, "Lady, are you fucking kidding me?"
That was really good, Rick. That was awesome.
Love that. That's great.
That is a good
Um,
side one. Yes.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. There's so much less. And I really don't even go to the American Monsterverse movies.
Okay.
I
Well,
went to the first one. I almost fell asleep.
you
You
like
know,
Cloverfield, though.
I loved Cloverfield,
Yeah.
but Cloverfield was something
Different. Yes.
totally
Yes.
different. You know,
Well, I'm gonna.
Cloverfield answers absolutely no questions for
That's
you,
true.
and I love that about it.
Yeah.
You know, and I loved all those like little crab-like creatures.
Hmm.
Especially outside of stone crab season.
Hmm. Hmm.
So but Cloverfield is a different story.
That's true.
It's
Um,
in I put Cloverfield more in the lineage of Alien
you're right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
than of Godzilla or any other
Totally fair.
monster movie.
Totally fair. Sarah, I don't know if I was able to send you an essay by Rick, and I'm assuming it's going to be in the book, on the ecology of Godzilla.
I have not read it
All
yet,
right.
but
It's quite
I
incredible because, Rick is being, I hope I can reveal this, but Rick happens to love reptiles. I don't know if you've gotten that so far from his, enthusiasm, but there's something in tandem that happened with, did your love of reptiles come before or after the museum or
At the same
Godzilla?
time,
At the same
what
time.
my father took
All right.
me
At
at,
the same time.
to get to the first reptile house.
Yes.
We had to go. I mean, to the first dinosaur hall.
Okay.
We had to go through the reptile room,
Oh, shit.
right?
That's amazing.
And or we did go through the reptile room,
Yeah.
whatever. Uh, and the uh, centerpiece of the reptile room is this great big glass case
Mm,
with two full-grown Komodo dragons,
mm.
one sort of standing guard, and the other tearing into a dead wild pig. Right?
Wow, that is a little boy's dream come true, isn't it?
it truly is.
Oh, well, I mean, I knew that there was such a thing as Komodo dragons,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but I'd never seen. I
Mm,
didn't realize how big they were,
mm.
and I was transfixed, but I didn't know what was coming.
Yeah,
But I was really transfixed by the Komodo dragons.
yeah.
What's interesting is that Douglas Burton, who was the last of several generations of globe-trotting socialite explorers,
Cool. I love it.
you know, like the ones who kept getting lost on the Nile, Richard Burton kept
Right,
tripping over,
right,
right?
right, right.
But Burton knew, but Douglas Burton knew what he was doing. I mean, uh, he had read about the Komodo dragons, and he decided he was going to go to the Lesser Sunda Islands
Mm,
and find one for himself, right?
mm,
And he was encouraged by Henry Fairfield Osborn,
mm.
who was president of the Museum of Natural History. So he heads off, uh, you know, to the Lesser Sundas by way of China. he gets caught up in a military uprising
Mm.
in China and winds up being barricaded in Beijing, or Peking as it was known.
Hmm.
And he winds up staying at a hostel, a very luxurious hostel, where another American adventurer, explorer, a paleontologist named Roy Chapman Andrews, was staying after having just discovered the nest of what he thought was Protoceratops. Later on, turns out it was actually Oviraptor, but he thought it was Protoceratops. The fossilized nest of this dinosaur in the Gobi Desert. And he tells Burton about this.
Mm.
And of course, this makes Burton want even more to go get his Komodo dragon, right? So uh, uh, Andrews is also working for the Museum of Natural History, and he is his discovery proves that dinosaurs laid eggs. Unfortunately, he was unable to determine which came first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Goes on and on, doesn't it? Keeps on giving that one.
Yeah. Anyway, so Burton goes down to Indonesia.
Yeah.
He shoots himself a bunch of Komodo dragons, right?
Mm.
And he brings them back to the museum. He tries to bring a couple alive, but they don't even survive the trip.
Mm.
Right? Watching all of this with extreme jealousy
Mm-hmm.
is yet another adventuring socialite by the name of, you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Marion C. Cooper.
Marion. Oh, is that John Wayne?
No.
No. Who is it?
Marion C. Cooper is the creator of King Kong.
No. Oh, that's
Oh, yes.
awesome. That's
Oh,
awesome.
yes. Marion C. Cooper and Douglas Burton were good friends.
Oh, wow.
Cooper uh, was also an adventurer, and he made documentary films,
Mm.
especially of primitive cultures.
Mm.
He filmed the coronation of Haile Selassie.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
Things like that.
Yeah.
He filmed a tribal war in Malaysia.
Okay.
He
Okay.
made a classic documentary called Brass,
Uh-huh.
which you can still get on Amazon,
Huh.
which traces
Which,
a
if we're boycotting
Turkish.
Amazon, we cannot get it.
Well, you can't get it today, but it traces the adventure, well, the travails of a Turkish tribe that has to cross the mountains into Iran every year.
Mm.
And we're talking about pulling the sheep up by
Mhm.
rope and stuff like that to find them pasturage,
Mm.
and then has to go all the way back again the next year, it's 4 or 5 months. And he filmed that. So he hears about Douglas Burton finding these giant lizards on a remote Pacific island.
Uh,
And he has this great idea that originally he wanted to go with Burton and film,
mm.
the Komodo dragon hunt,
Mhm.
but he was already otherwise obligated. And he was obligated,
Mhm.
it's great. He was obligated by the anti-communist forces in Russia who were
Mm.
fighting against Lenin and the Russian. He was a pilot. Okay.
Mhm.
He went to Russia instead. He was flying a fighter plane,
Mm.
a biplane fighter, got shot down, imprisoned in a Russian prison camp, seduced a nurse who helped him escape, but left her with a child and supported that child with his King Kong money,
Mm.
for the rest of his life.
Mhm.
I mean, it,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
there's a book called Living Dangerously.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay.
the incredible life of Marion C. Cooper. You
Wow.
have to read that book.
I'm writing
All
it down.
right, You'll
Me
read
too.
it with your mouth hanging open. I
Or
haven't told you a quarter of the other shit, the other stuff that Cooper did.
yeah. Sorry, we're allowed to swear on here.
Yeah, but he wanted to do the Komodo dragon hunt. It didn't work out.
Interesting. And okay.
So in retrospect,
Mm,
he thought he'd make a film about, Komodo dragons fighting gorillas
yes.
on a tropical on a,
Yeah.
on a lost tropical island.
Mhm.
And they had a dream about a giant gorilla.
Mm,
So he switched out the Komodo dragons for King Kong and a bunch of dinosaurs.
mhm.
And he made that particular tropical island adventure his own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is sitting behind Godzilla because there are these Komodo dragons. They bring them to New York. They're at the museum, and they're the gateway to the dinosaur hall.
Mm.
So I finally tore myself away from the
Yeah.
Komodo. My father
Yeah.
pulled me away from the
Yeah.
Komodo dragons.
It's amazing.
And the next thing is go through this archway,
Yeah.
and there's a T-Rex,
Mm.
towering into the murk. The Museum of Natural History was a very kind of dark,
Mm.
shadowy place.
Back then.
It's like Castle Bron.
Yeah.
Now it's all brightly lit and
Yeah.
airy and sterile.
Mhm.
Uh, but my first encounter with the T-Rex was like, holy shit,
Mm.
look
Yeah.
at this thing.
Yeah.
And there was uh, another diorama, another box, glass case
Mhm.
that had a replica T-Rex skull, full size, at floor level.
Yeah.
So if you're a little kid, you could go nose to nose with this thing.
It's insane. Well,
Yeah.
you're bringing me to something. I don't know if you feel you answered one of the puzzles that you set out at the beginning of your book. And I want to go to Douglas Copeland wrote a book called Generation X. It's about a disenfranchised generation living in a morally, spiritually corrupt culture. Uh, you can kind of guess where that might be. And at the end, the redeeming moment is when I'm not sure if the main
Well,
character.
I don't remember much of it. I was too stoned.
Oh, you're funny. Yeah. Well, maybe I was too. But I remember the ending where either his car may break down the character, and he looks out and there's a tour bus of kids with Down syndrome, and they're like
Yeah,
the only happy people in the world
yeah,
because they're egoless and they're still pure of heart. Now, your book begins with a memory of being in front of that dinosaur head and a group of Jewish kids from a church from a temple on tour with their
yeah.
leader, and they have down
Hasidic. They were Hasidic
Hasidic.
kids.
Yes, and they're on tour, and the little boy stops, and they have Down syndrome, and he
They
begins,
all had, yeah.
and when they leave, the other kids go ahead, and he stays behind, and he begins to pray. I mean, I'm so
He prays directly to the dinosaur
to
head,
directly
to the
to the
T-Rex.
dinosaur, and I
Yeah, and
see that
he's holding his prayer book, and he's
correct. Yes, it's so profound. And then at the end, during your book, you come into the Godzilla's ecology. And one thing you talk about is that Sarah, this is amazing. He tracks how Moby Dick and Godzilla may have crossed paths. They use the same migration pathway.
yeah.
And but
Interesting.
isn't it interesting? And he has a great
Well,
line. He has a great line where it's like the region seems to be a bad place to infuriate leviathans of any sort.
yeah,
But Rick,
yeah,
the answer that I took from this to your puzzle is that in the filming of Godzilla, when you describe Godzilla, reacting to the ocean, to bombs, to people, he's always looking around. He's
yeah.
thinking. He's thinking. He's actually a sentient animal.
He does, and that great scene. I think the apex
Mm,
of the actual Godzilla scenes
mm,
in that original film is he's approaching the high tension power lines.
mm,
Okay,
mm,
very slowly walks up. His torso is lit by searchlights.
mm,
Okay,
mm,
and he stops before he reaches the lines, and he looks this way,
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
He looks back and forth at the power lines, like, you know. Now there's something to that too.
Mm.
Uh, Japanese temples have a magic cord
Yes.
wrapped around the temple
Of
called the
course.
shimenawa. And the shimenawa are hung with zigzag paper or
Mm-hmm.
balsa wood cutouts. Called, I don't remember what they're called. Shide, which are lightning bolts. And the idea of the shimenawa and the shide is to keep evil spirits
Okay.
from entering the temple, from coming into the sacred precinct. So here's Godzilla coming up to the shimenawa that they put up around Tokyo to keep him out.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the minute he touches it, there are like electric sparks, lightning flashes all over the place. It's,
Yes. Yes.
it's
Amazing.
a temple precinct.
It's a
It's the
yes.
numinous center of Tokyo
Yes.
that they're trying to keep him out of.
Yes.
And just the way that ritual on Odo Island
Mm.
didn't work.
Yeah.
Uh, this doesn't work
It
either.
doesn't work either.
He
Well,
busts through it.
yes, and the punchline here is that many innovations in paleontology came out of Asia in the last 30 years. And it's
Yeah,
partly because they don't have the kind of hierarchy about humanity as Europe does. Every living creature is sentient. So in Asian paleontologists, we're able to see the kind of culture that primates had, animals had, and it was quite innovative back in the 90s and zeros. And I
yeah,
think what you're seeing with you say that it predates, that the movie predates, preconfigures the innovations eventually to come out about dinosaurs and
yeah.
their nature.
And by the way, so Godzilla,
Yes.
they say that Godzilla is 50 meters tall.
Mm.
It's 160 feet tall. The American version is 300 feet, 400. Crap.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, um, and that was too big for Therapsid, you
Mm.
know. But now we've got sauropods coming out of Argentina
Hmm.
that are at least that big,
Yeah.
if not bigger.
Yeah.
And yet try and imagine now these sauropods are Godzilla-sized animals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
That is
yeah,
amazing.
he got that. Uh,
Cool. That's
what I
cool.
find amazing is that Honda anticipated. Watch what happens when Godzilla first emerges from Tokyo Bay,
Mhm.
right, and starts heading for the shore, and you see him wobbling back and forth. You know, it's a lovely touch. This is a giant creature who's supported by buoyancy in the
Mhm.
water in his normal habitat. And now he's emerging from it. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, he's tottering. In fact, the first time he emerges, by the party boat, uh, you see his head droop and everything is like, I can't get used to this. He goes back in the water again and bother anybody,
Right.
right? And then a couple nights later, he emerges. He's still wobbling, but this time he's determined. Now, why is he so determined?
I don't know.
Uh, a lot of people say that he's a mindless force
Hmm.
and that it's pure hostility. Sarah picked up on that. Yeah, absolutely, there's hostility. But he's had nothing to eat. Okay. In fact, one thing about Godzilla, if you watch it again, you'll notice nobody eats anything.
Oh.
Okay. It's true.
Oh.
And, Emiko pours a bottle of sake for her father. And as soon as she does that, you hear boom, boom, boom. And her father jumps up and says, It's Godzilla. Godzilla's coming, You didn't even get to drink his sake.
Mm.
So, but Godzilla, in the original print, when he comes up over the mountain, he's got a cow in his mouth.
Mm.
Honda and Tsuburaya decided, after looking at the film, that it didn't work for whatever reason.
Mm.
It's out of scale. It is too gory. That's not what he wanted it.
Mm.
So they eliminate the cow scene. Okay. Steven Spielberg,
Mm.
who was a huge fan
Oh yeah.
of Kurosawa and of Honda,
Yeah.
paid tribute to the missing cow scene in Jurassic Park, where the T-Rex appears over the treetops, chewing on the goat.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So I mean, Godzilla resonates,
Yeah.
in other ways.
All the way.
But Godzilla has, he doesn't need anything. Okay,
Mm.
something that big um, probably feeds on giant squid and whales and things like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And he's too big and bulky to be fast.
Mhm.
So he's got this corrosive breath
Mhm.
that he can use to poison his prey.
Mhm.
You can see him burning a whale with it,
Yeah.
just like acid burning.
Yeah.
But now he's big and radioactive and everything runs away from him. All right.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He's sinking these boats. Okay. Lots of them because they look like whales to him. And the boats go down and you don't see him anymore. And you can imagine him grabbing the boat,
Yeah.
biting into it, and ah, you know, can't eat this shit. And what does he do when he comes on shore? What's the first thing he does? He grabs a train in his mouth and he
Yeah.
spits that out too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now we know that he eats cows and pigs
Mm-hmm.
because the headmaster of Odo Island testifies to the diet committee that all their cattle are missing.
Yeah.
So he's been eating,
Yeah.
but he's awfully big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not enough for something that big. Next thing you know, he's being depth charged
Mm.
by the Japanese Navy and chased away from Odo Island. So he swims, he just follows the Isuzu Trench,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right up into Tokyo Bay. If you look at the geography, the ocean floor geography, it's just got nothing but pathways for him,
Uh,
you
that's
know.
cool. That's really
So he
cool.
just follows that ridge. It would take him right into Tokyo Bay, and
Well,
poof, there he is. And he comes up, and the train tastes like shit.
interesting that you
So
say he was killing ships because now we know that the surfers that get attacked by animals, they think they're seals. They don't think they're killing a human. They think they're catching or damaging or scaring a human. They think the shadow looks like a seal. So
yeah,
again, Godzilla has predicted what we know by science now. It's like,
you've seen some of those films of great whites coming up under a walrus,
yes,
like hit like boom,
yes,
right? Yeah. Well, Godzilla, uh, I mean, he's not just sinking these ships out of spite,
no,
you know.
he's hungry.
Uh, yeah, and
He's hangry, right?
Hangry,
He's hangry.
hangry.
yeah, he has,
Good
yeah,
one,
but
Sarah.
he has come up all the way from the Marshall Islands
Mm.
where he's been irradiated, right?
Mhm.
He's followed the this chain of trenches,
Mhm.
okay, which like a crescent goes right up into the mouth of Tokyo Bay. And he doesn't sink a ship until he gets right offshore of Japan. Okay.
Uh, uh,
He's been hunting. I mean, he's been trying to find something to eat,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and he keeps sinking these ships, hoping one of them will taste good.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's if you put it in that context, you
Mhm.
have an organism mechanism. You're dealing with something that has some functional substance
Logic.
that's not just horror. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I really found that really charming that the ecology section was really fascinating. And I didn't know that the name is a combination of gorilla and whale.
Yeah, Gojira. Go for Gorilla, Japanese loanword, and Jiro, which is whale.
Wow, that's cool.
But who's the whale?
I don't know. Maybe
Oh,
us.
huh?
Who is the whale?
The film is full of hints
Yes.
who the whale is. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
First of all, when Godzilla appears over the top of Hachiman Hill, he's got a crooked jaw.
Hmm.
In fact, he's got a crooked jaw. Right? That's your first hint.
Uh-huh.
Who's the whale?
MacArthur? MacArthur?
No, Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. Okay, thank you. That's who the
Ahab.
whale was. Ahab.
Whichever one of ye raises me, a white-headed whale with a wrinkled brow and a crooked jaw, shall have this gold coin, right?
Mm, mm,
We don't stop there. Let's jump ahead to Dr. Serizawa's laboratory, or
mm-hmm,
his house.
mm-hmm,
His laboratory's in the basement, right?
mm-hmm.
The first scene where Hagiwara, the reporter, comes with Emiko to interview him about his work. And doesn't want to talk about it.
Hmm.
The window guards, the wrought iron window guards behind him are like a rack of harpoons. They're
Mm.
rods with fluted points,
Ah.
like a rack of harpoons on a whaling boat. Okay. And then he takes her down after Hagiwara leaves and shows her the oxygen destroyer. Jump ahead a bunch of scenes. After Godzilla has done his number on Tokyo, Emiko and Ogata come back to see Serizawa,
Mm.
and he's sitting in front of these harpoons again. And Emiko says, I told Ogata and Steve, I told Ogata about the oxygen destroyer. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. And Ogata says, yes, you do. What we have to have it. We can't let this go on. And so the only two scenes in the film where we see these harpoons are scenes where the oxygen destroyer is being discussed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and as Ahab, with his missing leg, goes down with Moby Dick,
Mm.
so Serizawa, with his missing eye,
Mm-hmm.
goes down with Godzilla.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know. And there's one more thing. The man who translated Moby Dick into Japanese, Tomoji Abe,
Mm-hmm.
before he made Godzilla, Honda worked as assistant director. It's just a contract job
Mm-hmm.
for Toho Films on a movie called Shimbunkas, which means newspaper kid. Story about a kid growing up in
Yeah.
journalism. Written by none other than Tomoji Abe, who was in the process of translating the third and final installment of Moby Dick
Wow.
at the time that they made the movie together.
Mm, mm.
So we know Honda knew him.
Yeah.
We know
Pretty
Honda
cool.
knew about Moby Dick.
Yeah.
And, the symbolism is, all of there's other stuff too, but all the Moby Dick hints, okay?
Yeah.
He's the Jura.
Yeah. Mm,
You know.
mm, mm.
Also, this is another interesting thing. The movie version of Moby Dick
Mm-hmm.
came out in January of 54.
Mm,
Okay.
mm-hmm.
And Captain Ahab is telling Starbuck, we'll find Moby Dick near Bimini.
Yes. Bimini. Yes.
Near
That's
Bimini, right?
crazy.
Site of the atomic bomb test.
Correct. Correct.
What's crazier is Bimini does not occur in the novel.
No.
Okay. Ray Bradbury wrote Bimini into the screenplay
Wow.
of Moby Dick
Yeah.
uh, because it was already such a part of atomic lore.
Yeah, and it would have been a topical location for people to relate to, maybe. And then the danger, and then maybe implying that Moby Dick is a monster that could be radioactive eventually.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I mean, Bikini has been the site of atomic tests since 1946.
Yeah,
So by 1953, when they're writing the screenplay for Moby Dick, it's part of folklore.
yeah. Which reminds
There's
me,
so much of this stuff, you know.
well, that reminds me, today is an anniversary. Well, just about an anniversary. Yeah, March 10th, 1945, the incendiary banking bombing of Tokyo.
Yeah,
The in
Operation Meeting House.
There you go. So we're on a significant day doing our podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also the day when the two lovers meet
Oh,
in
shut up.
What Is Your Name?
Wow.
That's that they meet in a bomb shelter during the raid. And
Oh.
here's something else that's fascinating. One of the many buildings in Tokyo destroyed by Operation Meeting House was a Japanese nuclear laboratory called Riken
Mm-hmm.
in Tokyo. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that effectively was the end of the Japanese nuclear program, but they had pretty much given up on it anyway. They didn't have the money,
Mm.
and the Army and the Navy were, as usual, feuding over who got to control the atomic bomb project in Japan. So nothing ever got done, right? But what's interesting is that Riken was one of the facilities in Japan that specialized in producing heavy water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and heavy water is
Part of a
basically
nuclear
water with one oxygen atom
yeah.
removed.
For
Okay,
nuclear power plants, for example.
right.
Right? Yeah.
So what is Serizawa working on?
Oh, heavy water.
What does he tell them? What does he tell Amy COVID? I am going to research oxygen from from every angle, and he
Mm-hmm.
comes up with the oxygen destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we know he wasn't in battle. They didn't get the eye patch in battle. And the
Mm-hmm.
Japanese are going to risk a scientist like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in some Okinawa trench, right? So probably he was, wounded during one of the bombing raids. But the scene when Hagiwara says, a Swiss colleague of mine heard from heard from a German scientist that what you're working on could be used against Godzilla.
Mm.
And Serizawa gets very defensive. I don't have any and I don't have any German colleagues. You know, like number one, there is that sensitivity of having been part of the Axis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any German. The other thing is, why would a German know what he was doing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Why
And
would
why
they?
would a German know that he was working on an oxygen destroyer? Unless they were all part, and they cooperated, Germany and Japan cooperated on their nuclear programs. Okay.
Mm.
Serizawa's crippled conscience, I think, is an expression of the fact that he feels terrible about having had anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's never stated overtly, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's right there if you look straight ahead at what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
What and how did the guy like Serizawa, 9 years from the end of the war, where did he get the money for a place like that and a laboratory like that?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Unless it was government money, military
Right.
money.
Right. Which they're not allowed to have military money.
Well, if he got it during the war and he
Oh,
built a
to
fab
pay.
and
Okay.
yeah, he'd
Yeah.
keep it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much about him and about his attitude,
Mm.
his refusal. I'm not going to part with this. I'm not going to reveal this thing. I'm not going to do anything with it until I know some good can come of it.
Hmm.
This is a guy with a really badly damaged conscience,
Yeah. Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, uh, it's just another level of Godzilla, you know.
Hmm.
Like I said, you're having lunch with Akira Kurosawa every day.
Hmm.
You're gonna, you're gonna, you're
Yeah.
gonna feel things like that in,
Gonna be trickle over. Sarah,
yeah,
Sarah, do you know anything about female sacrifice practices and rituals?
early
To be honest, I don't.
Okay.
Not specifically female anyway.
Yeah. Or human sacrifice and cannibalism.
Oh,
ended in
human
Japan,
sacrifice,
ended
I'd
in
say.
Japan
Thought issue.
1600 to 2000 years ago. And it was practiced, but they stopped it and they replaced it with symbolic services.
Okay.
Okay, a kind of a natural progression. Again, it was something Joseph Campbell wrote about extensively,
Hmm.
and so did Mircea Eliade.
Hmm.
It's natural progression from human sacrifice to symbolic sacrifice.
Right. Right.
And in fact,
But
during the during the ritual on Odo Island, the expiation ritual, when
yeah.
you've got Yamabashi Tengu dancing, Izuma is sitting in the audience explaining to Hagiwara, the reporter, that in old times, he says, we used to put a young girl on a raft and send her out as a sacrifice. Okay. And he makes it sound like he remembers, but he does. We're
Right.
talking 2000, 1500 years, 1600 years. Like I said, he is the spirit of the island, the shamanic spirit,
Hmm.
you know. And
Yeah. I thought there might be some
his
feminist, I thought there might be some feminist angle to the mention of these female. Are they worried about fertility with this radioactive thing? You know what I mean? That's where I'm kind of trying to wonder if that is
well,
some implication.
they would be because they've got all these deformed and cancer-stricken children.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that only appears in Godzilla briefly in the form of that irradiated child,
Yeah.
being examined by Tanabe. That's all Honda needed to make that point.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, nobody needed to have it explained to them
Yeah.
in Tokyo in 1954.
No, and also China, since when one of the there was somebody involved in this story who was a prisoner of war of China. And I mean, prisoner of war,
Honda,
yeah,
Honda,
yeah, prisoner of
Honda
wars,
was a
right.
he,
Yeah,
he was a Japanese prisoner of war
yeah, yeah.
in
And
China,
and
and
human sacrifice has been part of the history of prisoner of war.
yeah, he talked about he would write home to his wife. This is before he became a prisoner. And by
Yeah.
the way, he was captured by the Russians and turned over to the Chinese.
Okay.
Let them foot the bill, right?
Okay.
But before that happened, he would write home to his wife saying, I saw this crazy lieutenant shoot this kid for no reason, and he said, a normal person would have to go insane here. Is I don't know how I could, contain my sanity
Oh,
with this shit going on,
yeah.
you know. So he saw, and then on the way back to Tokyo, he was on a train that passed through Hiroshima. Now, this would be 1947. Um, the Allies put up a very tall fence all along the route of the train.
Hmm.
So if I've read that, Honda was horrified by what he saw in Hiroshima. No, he saw nothing.
Hmm.
He saw the fence. You know what he did see in 1952 with the Treaty of St. Louis,
Hmm.
uh, or the Treaty of San Francisco, when the censorship ended and all the photographs and films of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became public. That's when he saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure he knew something terrible
Mm-hmm.
must have happened, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But he had what was left of Tokyo to tell him, you know, something awful had gone on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does the fence not make it a bit worse though? Because your imagination is going to fill in what you're not seeing.
Of course,
It's not a barrier to your imagination.
well, Godzilla's very good at inviting your imagination in. You know, um, you know, is Godzilla's poor Haruo Nakajima in that 200 and something pound rubber suit,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But when you're watching it, you're completely seduced.
Mm-hmm.
The light and shadow, the darkness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I submit that Godzilla does not become, Godzilla does not become the foundation of a 70-year cinematic tradition if it's in color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay?
there
The
is that mystery,
manipulation, yeah,
the mystery of black and white. And for sure, there's also the kabuki. And is it kabuki, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where you see the puppeteer and the puppet.
right.
And so you've got that weird feeling where there's something fake about Godzilla, but you don't care. You want to believe.
Yeah, because you're part of that's yeah, that's in the book too. I talk about that,
Ah,
that effect. And that Honda knew that as far as Japanese audiences were concerned, they'd never seen anything like this.
hmm,
Okay. There was incredibly enough heart, a truly awful
yeah.
uh, movie in the early 1940s, late 1930s called King Kong in Edo.
Mm, mm.
Okay.
Not familiar with that.
It was truly awful, you know.
Maybe some Saturday when I was a little kid. I don't know.
Well, all of the prints were mercifully destroyed by the fire. So we have one or two black and white,
Okay.
you know, shots from it.
Yeah.
That King Kong, I'll say no more.
All right. He sucked.
But Honda knew
Uh-huh.
in 1954
Yep.
no one had seen anything like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he used those kabuki and no play effects
Mm-hmm.
to make something totally alien
Mm-hmm.
feel a little more familiar. Again, invite your imagination.
Yeah.
He told his crew when they started shooting, if you don't think you can take this seriously, quit,
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
I'll replace you.
Yeah.
You know, you have to take this seriously.
To film it
So,
properly. Well, you know what? I mean,
yeah,
I don't know if we're going to stay much longer, but you mentioned the nuclear bomb was like a vertical axial, and I wanted to mention that in the theater there's that tree they have on stage which is a vertical axial, and all cultures have vertical axials, like campfires from an Indian or Native American fire, a campfire going up to the sky, a crucifix, a world pillar, a cosmic pillar,
a
um,
totem.
a totem and the stupa. You know, I love my stupas. And
Yeah.
maybe you're helping Godzilla be realized as a vertical axial.
Well, uh, I think he's no drama. It always starts with a priestly figure saying, I am a wandering priest. I have traveled all over, you know. And I think Godzilla's in that function. And that
Ooh,
the axial symbol is unstated, but it's the mushroom cloud.
mushroom cloud. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a sad one. That's our con- that's a sad one. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Rick, honest to God, and Sarah, you know I always love it when you're on here talking. You always bring something different to my mind. I think we could probably we've already almost talked 2 hours. I think we could talk a couple more hours, but I am so excited for when your book gets released. The little bit I've read is completely compelling.
Glad you think so.
I do, and I wanted
You
to,
know,
you
it
know,
was really, I tell you what, though, you didn't get to see the two chapters on Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus
I
One.
can't wait.
Okay. I'll make one comment about Godzilla Minus One, and that is that did you see Minus One?
No.
Okay. As the movie progresses, you get dates. This happened on January 6th. This happened February 4th. This happened, March 11th. And you go right through the end of May, and then you stop getting dates. And the pilot is waking up in the hospital after his boat got sunk, right? And this would put us right about the middle of June, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is when the happy-go-lucky members of the Armed Forces radio station broadcast their monster hoax, June of
Oh,
June of 1947. Now,
wow.
Yamazaki is a specialist in post-war Japan.
Mm-hmm.
His three greatest works, is Eternal Zero,
Mm-hmm.
Archimedes,
Mm-hmm.
and then Third Street, Sunshine on Third Street, which, by the way, features a guest appearance by Godzilla. Is this writer who's getting nowhere, trying to get a foothold on a career. So he writes a Godzilla story,
Mm-hmm.
and his little niece, who's like 7 or 8 years old, is looking over his shoulder, and you see in his imagination Godzilla, emerging, and attacking Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
and his niece says, "What are you doing? He's copyrighted, you asshole. You can't steal that, you know." So this is the guy they got to make Godzilla Minus One.
That's cool. That's beautiful.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. All right. When does your book come out?
In Godzilla, I could go for another 2
I know.
hours.
When does your book get released?
It's supposed to come out June 27th.
All right. But we're going to put this podcast up anyway, and then I'll share on social media and bug everybody to get a copy.
I appreciate that.
All right.
I hope it's on time.
I hope so too.
I'm waiting. They sent me the first set of proofs
Okay.
and told me to index it.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, that's a lot of
They had to
work.
come up with an index. And I wrote back that I said, I'll begin procrastinating immediately.
Well, thank you so much for
But I gave them their goddamn index in 3
love it.
days.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I love indexes. I'm addicted to them. I read an index before I read a book. I love them.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who do.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
All
right.
They knit their own narrative together out of it.
Correct. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. This is fascinating.
It has been. Godzilla. All right. Talk to you both later.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.